Welcome in. It's another edition of Soccer Files on the SDH Network. My name is Jason Longshore. Thanks for hanging out with me this afternoon. Wanted to tell the story of Pelé and his visit to Atlanta when he was a player. He made other trips to Atlanta over the years, and a lot of sponsorship opportunities and things like that. But one of the first things I remember as a kid was Pelé was the sponsor slash presenter of an event, like a skills competition that was all over the city. And I remember participating in it in Clayton County, at the Clayton County Youth Soccer Association at Fort Gillem, where you had a bunch of different individual skills you had to do. I remember there was a dribbling one, a shooting one where you had to hit targets, things like that. And they picked the best players in these competitions around the city in different age groups, and they got to participate in an event that Pelé was going to be there. I think it was the first year that I played soccer, 1986, maybe 1987, if I remember correctly. I do remember trying out for it. I didn't get picked. I think it was part of the big Labor Day event, which is now turned into the Atlanta Cup. But Pelé's presence in soccer in Atlanta was always a big thing, but his appearance as a player in Atlanta in 1968 was a massive thing. And I want to tell the story of how all of that came together. About a week or so, sadly, after Pelé passed at the age of 82 in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Now, in 1968, the Atlanta Chiefs were in their second year as a club, but it was the first year that they could have international friendlies. It's a much longer story, and I know we've talked about it before here and there on Soccer Files episodes, and we'll probably dig into this deeper as we go. But in 1967, the Chiefs were part of the NPSL. It's not the same NPSL that exists today. But the NPSL was not sanctioned by the United States Soccer Football Association. Yes, it was the USSFA at the time. It wasn't sanctioned by FIFA. The competing league that imported full teams from other countries was sanctioned by FIFA and by the USSFA. The soap opera in U.S. soccer is not new. It's a little different right now than it was then, but it's always existed. And in 1967, the Chiefs had a successful year at the gate. They were one of the better drawing teams. They planted a ton of seeds for soccer in the Southeast with camps, with clinics. But 1968 was the first year that they could have international friendlies. And they did before the Pelé match with Santos. They brought Manchester City over, defeated them twice, beat them the first time in front of about 23,000 fans. Manchester City wanted a rematch after trashing the Chiefs afterwards in the media. Match got canceled on Manchester City's tour. They were the current English First Division champions at the time, the precursor to the Premier League. And they came back through Atlanta on their way back to England, brought a couple more players back who'd been part of the English national team and weren't in the first match. And the Chiefs won again in the second match. And it drew even better, over 25,000 fans. So international matches were always a strategy of the Chiefs, but especially after this success, it was a huge opportunity. And it was something that the Chiefs were drawing better than really any other, now it was the NASL, any other NASL team were doing in these friendlies. There were international matches in the U.S. before the NASL over the years. A lot of times it would be two international clubs playing. In 1968, before Santos came to Atlanta, they played Napoli at Yankee Stadium and drew over 43,000 fans. But the matches between the NASL teams and these touring international teams did pretty well, but Atlanta was really at the forefront of drawing for these, which is surprising because Atlanta was not an international city like we know it today in 1968. Now, Pelé, to catch up on where he was in 1968, he'd already won 2 World Cups, debuted for Santos in 1957 at 16 years old. He won the 58 World Cup at 17, scoring multiple goals in the run, started the tournament as a substitute. became a world star, was part of the 1962 team, but was injured early in the tournament. 1966 was a very disappointing World Cup. He was basically almost literally kicked out of it with physical play, and Brazil didn't get out of the group stage. He had been designated as a national treasure in Brazil, so he couldn't be sold to another team in the world without approval of the Brazilian parliament. Santos took advantage of this. They toured the world, and they made tons of money playing games all over the place all the time. The Brazilian league was probably even more crazily structured then than it is today in terms of state competitions and a national competition and cup competitions. And it wasn't a league in the normal sense that they played a full season and they had an off season. They had all these different gaps in their schedule. So Santos would take advantage of it and just go tour the world. They had already been to the U.S. Multiple times, and 1968 was no exception. They came multiple times. Pelé was known as the world's highest paid athlete at the time, and reports varied as to how much money he was making in salary and how much money he was making in endorsements. We'll talk about that as the reports in Atlanta were discussed. He was 26 years old. He didn't have to pay taxes on any of his income in Brazil. And he was, even in a city like Atlanta that had really no soccer background in 1968, he was known. He was known as soccer. So it was a big deal to try to get him. Before he played in Atlanta, he was on TV twice with Santos playing NASL teams. They were nationally televised games on the CBS network. WAGA Channel 5 was a CBS affiliate at that time, and they broadcast two of the games on the tour. The match in St. Louis that was televised on Sunday, June 30th at 3 o'clock. He was a known factor in Atlanta, even in a city that did not know soccer at the time. The first time a potential visit to Atlanta came up was July 4th. Alan Houck of the Atlanta Constitution wrote an article about the possibility. Phil Woosnam was quoted as saying, "Perhaps this will be the only chance we'll have to see him. Next season, he will be playing towards the Brazilian Championship back home, and the year after that, he could be on the World Cup team, and there's some talk he might retire and go out while he's still on top." That was another kind of undercurrent to all of this, was that he might not be around all that much longer, even though he was only 26 years old at the time. But he was making so much money, and there was the thought that maybe he would retire after the 1970 World Cup. July 8th, the follow-up article in the Atlanta Constitution. The Chiefs were working hard to get Santos on the schedule. Woosnam said that the man who was responsible for booking these visits, they're trying to get in touch with him to get a game in. They were even willing to do it on about a week's notice, looking at the July 16th date, trying to catch Santos before they left on their current U.S. tour. They played in Washington on the 14th. They wanted to get one more game on the 16th. Woosnam said that he personally believed that Pelé and Santos could outdraw Manchester City in Atlanta. But there was a possibility that Santos was going to come back to the U.S. in August, and that was kind of the backup plan. In that article on July 8th, it was said that Pelé earned about $1 million a year in salary and endorsements, all tax-free, and that was insane money at that time. July 9th, follow-up article in the Constitution. They couldn't get the 16th to work because the Chiefs were playing Kansas City on that date. Santos was playing in an exhibition in Bogota, Colombia on the 17th. They couldn't play it on the 15th because Santos was playing on the 14th. The Braves were at the Atlanta Stadium on the 15th. So there were all kinds of trying to get things rescheduled. But Woosnam said, quote, "Santos, however, has promised us that they would play us sometime here in August when and if they return to the United States. That date is still undecided." Woosnam said it was 99% certain at this point that Atlanta would play Santos sometime in either July or August. He said that the fans in Atlanta have proved that they want international soccer, and what they want, so do we. Now, Atlanta was also in demand because of those games from Manchester City that drew well, and Atlanta did well in those games. Peñarol of Uruguay, the 1966 Intercontinental Cup winners. They beat Real Madrid in the Intercontinental Cup. They'd won the Copa Libertadores to get to that. They requested a game with the Atlanta Chiefs on Wednesday, July 10th, but it was too short of a notice to make it happen. This is the July 9th Atlanta Constitution article. Woosnam said, the games are coming now. That's what we want. The opportunity to bring the world's best teams into Atlanta. We're really quite hopeful to add many more games this summer. We'll take them all as they come. Ken Macker, the chairman of the NASL, he was definitely big on getting these kinds of games booked, wanted the NASL to interact internationally, said that the NASL champion and an all-star team would travel around the world during the offseason to play foreign teams. This was on July 10th. That didn't happen. We know that the league basically disintegrated at the end of the 1968 season, and there were only 5 teams left. But the Atlanta Chiefs ended up becoming that NASL champion, and they would have had the opportunity to tour the world as the NASL champion. They did not get that, unfortunately. July 14th, that game with Santos in Washington was aired on WAGA Channel 5 in Atlanta on 3 p.m. Another opportunity to see Pelé and Santos live. July 17th, it was pretty much booked that Santos would come to visit Atlanta on August 10th at Atlanta Stadium. It was 99% certain, according to Phil Woosnam. He liked the 99% kind of odds that he'd put on things. An AP article on July 19th was posted in the Atlanta Constitution and added a little intrigue to Santos's potential visit. It was a story from the Associated Press about that game in Bogota, where the entire Santos team was jailed for 3 hours after the game. They were playing a Colombian all-star team, and a Colombian goal was disputed by Santos players, including Pelé. The referee, Guillermo Velasquez, ordered Pelé off the field. He sent him off. Then the referee was assaulted by a group of Santos players. Velasquez suffered minor facial injuries and left the stadium to file a complaint with the police. So he just leaves in the middle of the game. Another referee finished the game. When the game is over, Velasquez's complaint had already been filed. The police were there. They took the whole Santos team to the jail, including Pelé. They were there for 3 hours. The team had to issue a written apology to Colombian fans and to Velasquez. Santos did win the game 4-2 and then had to stay in jail for 3 hours afterwards. That had not happened on the U.S. tour, but it did happen in Colombia. July 21st, an article in the Atlanta Constitution, Tom Dial wrote after asking some of the Chiefs players about their thoughts about playing Pelé. And Freddie Mwila said, in Africa, he's a legend. Every young player wants to be like him, and fans there always cheer their favorite player by calling him Pelé, Pelé. Phil Woosnam said, just to watch him maneuver without the ball is enough to indicate to me that he is a great player, but when you see him with the ball, then it's obvious to all he's the greatest. He has all the physical assets to be a great player, but what makes him the greatest is his fine knowledge of the game and his ability to put that knowledge to effective use. Tom Dial wrote another article in the Constitution on July 24th. The game was now set for August 11th. It was set. It was done. Dial said in his article that Pelé made $1.25 million annually, including endorsements. Again, all tax-free. Santos's club president, Athy Curry, was quoted in this article as saying, I have received more than a dozen offers of over $1 million each for Pelé's contract. I can't sell it. If I did, they'd hang me in Santos. Dial wrote that between the years 1957 and 64, Santos and the Brazilian national team compiled a total of 456 games without a loss. I'm not 100% sure that's accurate, but that's what was being reported in the Atlanta Constitution on July 24th, 1968. Week later, Tom Dial had a follow-up article in the Constitution. Pelé was injured in a match in Paraguay on July 29th. The August 11th match was off because of the injury. He was expected to be out about 3 weeks. Santos were set originally to play in Oakland on August 4th, then midweek in Cleveland, then Atlanta on the 11th. It's going to be moved back, according to Dick Cecil, because Pelé is injured and not going to be able to be part of that. And as great as Santos was, you were booking them to see Pelé. Woosnam said, this has been a bombshell for us. You can only see an athlete of Pelé's quality once in a lifetime. Babe Ruth only comes around once. The idea was to make the dates good on Santos's end with a 2-week tour starting on August 27th. That's where things kind of were at this point after the injury. Woosnam said, I think it's as important that we get this man here as anything. It is a question of whether we can work it out with other teams, stadium availability, and other factors. Our league schedule is somewhat crammed in that period, August 27th to September 6th. But I think it's more important that Pelé come. We believe the city is capable of supplying a crowd of 35,000 or maybe even 40,000 to see a man like this. Who knows? If we could draw just under 26,000 to see Manchester City, there's really no telling how many will come to see Pelé. Dial wrote, as one Atlantan said recently when told Pelé and Santos were coming, I've never seen a soccer game before, but I think this is the time to go. Again, this is a city in 1968 that did not have an international flavor to it. There was no soccer real background in the city, but Pelé transcended that, so it was seen as a massive deal for him to come to Atlanta. The Chiefs were in the midst of a playoff race at this time, too, so that's what made this even more complicated. They were in a three-way race for the division title with Washington and New York, and they had 6 NASL games left on the schedule. The Santos game was scheduled for August 28th, and they were going to play on the 20th in Washington, the 24th at home against Baltimore, the 28th at home against Santos, September 1st at home against Washington, then 2 games on the road to see it out on the 4th of September in New York and the 6th of September in Washington. Now, they did have a game rescheduled to make room for the Santos game. It was tacked on at the end, if necessary, in Detroit. Luckily for the Chiefs, it ended up not being necessary because they got the results that they needed to win the division. They didn't have to cram that extra game in to make it even more complicated. But getting Pelé to Atlanta was seen as worth that risk. It was that big of a deal. Tom Dial wrote on August 22nd, Wednesday, August 28th, 1968, at 7:30 p.m., Edson Arantes do Nascimento will perform in Atlanta Stadium against coach Phil Woosnam's Chiefs. His presence may be the highest pinnacle yet reached in Atlanta sports history. Atlanta had only had the Braves for 2.5 seasons at this point. They'd only had the Falcons for 2 seasons. I think the Hawks were coming. I don't know if they had actually played a game in Atlanta yet. I'm not sure when the NBA season started in 1968. They were on their way. That was really what you had. You had college football. That was a huge deal in Atlanta. You'd had the Atlanta Crackers minor league baseball team. That's it. So Pelé coming in 1968, it's easy because the NASL and the Chiefs didn't last to say, like, it's a big deal, but whatever. At the time, it was seen as one of the biggest deals ever in Atlanta sports history to have somebody of the caliber of Pelé, even in a sport like soccer that was not seen as one of the major games in Atlanta at that time. It did get a lot of attention. It did get a lot of credit because the Chiefs were good, and frankly, the Braves and the Falcons really weren't at that time. So there was a lot of coverage. That didn't always result in tickets being sold, but the attention was there. Dial made a point about Pelé scoring 8 goals in a game. He compared it to a quarterback throwing 8 touchdown passes in a game. Dial said that Pelé held the world record for 129 goals in a season. I'm guessing maybe he was talking about a calendar year being a season. He said that Pelé's earnings per year were more than the entire National League All-Star baseball team's earnings combined. There were lots of references in the build-up to the game to the fact that Pelé and Peter McParland, who played for the Atlanta Chiefs, were both part of the 1958 World Cup team of the tournament. McParland played for Northern Ireland. He was part of that best 11. Pelé was part of that best 11. They didn't play against one another in the World Cup, but both were part of that. August 25th, Frank Hyland wrote about Pelé. He said, Pelé is to soccer what Babe Ruth was to baseball, what Arnold Palmer is to professional golf, what Johnny Unitas is to professional football. He is probably the first 27-year-old legend since Lord Byron. He noted that Santos will be even better on this tour than they were on the earlier U.S. tour. 5 members of the Brazilian national team weren't playing with Santos earlier in the year when they came to the U.S. 3 of the 5 are defenders. One's the goalkeeper. Another is an 18-year-old star named Edu, who was kind of seen as the next Pelé. The Chiefs were dealing with a bunch of injuries at this point as well. They did defeat Baltimore on August 24th, the home game preceding the game with Santos, 2-1. Ray Bloomfield was injured with a twisted knee. Brian Hughes had a neck injury. Gordon Ferry had a twisted ankle. Vic Rouse had a bruised thigh. Vic Crow had a bruised thigh as well. Peter McParland had a sore knee. That game on the 24th only drew 2,006 fans. It was really hot at that time, and it was played in the middle of the afternoon. John Cocking said it was at least 35 degrees hotter than anything I've ever played in before coming here. Made it really easy to skip coming out to that one. But the Chiefs got that win. That gave them a little bit of a cushion as they were trying to win the division alongside getting ready to play Santos. 15 players of this Santos team had appeared for the Brazilian national team over the years. One of those defenders who was back with them for this match, another very cool factor to having this team play in Atlanta in 1968, was Carlos Alberto, one of the greatest defenders of all time. Later captained the Brazilian national team in the 1970 World Cup, later played for the New York Cosmos and a couple others in the North American Soccer League. But he was part of that game as well. Day before the game, the Atlanta Constitution headline said, "Who will guard Pelé? We need 18 men." That's what Phil Woosnam said before the game. Talking about not just Pelé with the Santos team, Toninho, who was his forward partner in their 4-2-4, said that Pelé and Toninho, this is Woosnam, said that they present one of the strongest scoring combinations ever. Last week, Santos played in an international tournament in Buenos Aires. They played Benfica. They played Nacional of Uruguay. Boca Juniors, River Plate were both part of it. Santos defeated Benfica in the first game 4-2. Toninho scored all of the goals. Pelé had all of the assists. Second game against River Plate, Santos beat them 2-1. Toninho scored both of the goals. Pelé had both of the assists. Santos drew with Nacional and Boca Juniors. They finished undefeated. They won this tournament. They left Buenos Aires on August 26th in the morning, arrived in Miami late Monday afternoon, and they were set to land in Atlanta on Tuesday, August 27th, around 5 o'clock p.m. the day before the game was to be played. Tom Dial, in another article in the August 27th Atlanta Constitution, he broke down the way the teams played, a little bit of tactics in the Atlanta Constitution in 1968. He talked about how Santos played a 4-2-4 in terms of formation. That was typical of Brazilian teams at the time. I mean, you could call it a 4-4-2 in our modern terms because the wingers weren't purely staying up high the whole time. They were coming back. Pretty much functioned the same way. Atlanta played a 5-3-2 with the wingbacks getting forward, so kind of like our 3-5-2/5-3-2 that we see teams play now. Said that Santos was more like a zone defense in basketball, and Atlanta played more like a man-to-man. Atlanta was more physical, more aggressive. Santos was a little more passive defensively. Really cool to see that kind of an article from Tom Dial in the Atlanta Constitution in 1968. The advanced ticket sales had already passed 17,000. That was more than the first Manchester City game drew. Remember, these games are being scheduled kind of on the fly, so they weren't pre-sold. So it was all about really trying to get the word out and sell these tickets to a soccer community that didn't really exist at the time. So you're trying to get anybody who can buy tickets at that time to come out and buy it. In the article from Tom Dial, he talked about how the University of Brazil did a 6-month study of Pelé's intelligence, and the study resulted in this statement. Whatever this man might have decided to do in the field of physical or mental endeavor, he would have been a genius. It's the University of Brazil, so maybe they were a little bit biased, but yes, that's how Pelé was looked at in 1968. Kaiser Motong of South Africa said that playing against Pelé is his greatest thrill in his career up to this point. Kaiser Motong was very highly rated in the North American Soccer League at this time and was really breaking out with the Atlanta Chiefs in 1968. August 28th newspaper, the day of the game, Atlanta Constitution, had some quotes from Pelé. He was asked questions when he arrived on Tuesday via an interpreter. Pelé was asked if he had seen American football. He said yes, but only on television. I like the game, and I think I could play it, but it takes more muscle than brains. I think I would like to play baseball more. Pelé also said, I think soccer can become a big sport in the United States. When we were here before, we drew 20,000 in St. Louis and more than 20,000 in Washington. And in New York, there were more than 40,000. I think in a few years, soccer will be very big in this country. He also said that I will play in the World Cup in 1970. Right now, I plan to retire sometime around 1973 or 74, but I might change my mind and retire before then or play longer. And we know that he did play longer because he came to the North American Soccer League and played for the New York Cosmos. Unfortunately for Atlanta fans, at a time when there was not an NASL team in Atlanta between 1975 and 77 when Pelé played for the Cosmos. Pelé said he definitely did not want to coach. He didn't want to go into professional coaching. He said that I would only like to work with the small children. And we know that he did a lot of camps and clinics and things to teach soccer skills to kids. There was a really cool picture of Santos players, including Pelé, watching the Braves batting practice on Tuesday. So they landed, they answered some questions, they went down to the stadium, probably got a little bit of a workout in or something, I'm not 100% sure. But Santos players watching baseball batting practice is just kind of a weird juxtaposition that is really cool to me. So in the match itself, 7:30 p.m. kickoff on August 28th, the Atlanta Chiefs shocked everybody by scoring the first goal in 19 seconds. Freddie Muila got on the board first. Everybody was shocked. Alan Houck wrote, after that, it was all Santos and all Pelé in the most dazzling soccer display in Atlanta history. Now, there'd only been about a season and a half of Atlanta soccer history at this time that anybody really knew about. I don't think anybody was going to reference what people did in the old Georgia Soccer League in the 1910s or 1920s. So not a huge history of soccer in Atlanta, but Pelé had the most dazzling soccer display in Atlanta history in this match. Toninho leveled the score in the 16th minute, put home a rebound. Sven Lindberg made a save. Toninho put it home. Pelé gave Santos the lead in the 23rd minute, made it 3-1 with a header from a Joel pass in the 39th minute. 3-1 at halftime. Fouls, Atlanta had fouled Santos 8-3. They led in fouls. Santos led in shots 17-8. I think shots were pretty liberally given in the stats back at this time as well. Santos had 4 corners to Atlanta's 1. Pelé made it 4-1 in the second half, 68th minute. Pepe made the score 4-1. Pelé had the assist in the 68th minute, so 2 goals and an assist so far. Pelé got his hat trick in the 74th minute, unassisted. Kaiser Motong pulled one back for the Chiefs, made it 5-2 in the 75th minute. Santos added a 6th in the 84th minute. Very late on it, Pelé hit the crossbar with a shot from 50 yards out, which would have been even more amazing, especially if there had been video of that. Ended up finishing 6-2 Santos. Santos outshot Atlanta 28-19. Atlanta fouled Santos 17 times. Santos only fouled Atlanta 4 times. The Chiefs, in their somewhat brief history at this point, had never conceded more than 4 goals before. They gave up 6 here. After the game, fans ran onto the field. They surrounded Pelé. Somebody got his jersey. I'd love to know where that jersey has ended up over the years. Atlanta police had to clear a path for Pelé to get to the locker room. August 29th, Atlanta Constitution, a lot of recap and articles about the game. Jesse Outlar said that Pelé's gross income reportedly is $1.25 million per year, but the Atlanta Chiefs probably think he's underpaid. The gentleman from Brazil plays soccer like he invented the game. Outlar went on to say, Pelé can do more tricks with the ball with his feet than most guys could do with their hands if handling soccer balls were permissible. Alan Houck said the Chiefs were outclassed in virtually every department. If there was one phase of the game in which Atlanta held the upper hand, it was in unwarranted mayhem. I guess that's the 17 fouls to 4 for Santos. Unwarranted mayhem. I like that from Houck. Charlie Roberts, in his article, compared Pelé to Hank Aaron, to Gale Sayers. Quoted Emmett Kapingwe of the Chiefs, I've never seen anybody like this. Pelé has something. He's really something. Santos puts you in your place. They slow it down, show you the ball on purpose. Then when you come for it as they want you to, they pass and go. Freddie Muila said they keep it cool. When they need it, they have it. They're one of the top teams in the world. I just saw them in films. Back home, I feel sure people will be grateful and thrilled to hear we play against great teams like Santos. I regard Pelé as the greatest. What films show about him is truth. Pelé, talking about the Atlanta Chiefs, he said they're a good team. They have not played together as much as we have. When they play together more, they will be a very good team. Talking about Kaiser Motong, his nickname was Boy Boy. Pelé said, Boy Boy is very good. He handles the ball well, is fast, very strong, and very aggressive. He reminds me very much of Eusebio, the great Portuguese legend. That's an insanely high compliment to give to Kaiser Motong. Pelé said he wants to see soccer succeed in the U.S., quote, because it is my game, not for any financial reasons. Pelé was asked about the fouls because he was knocked down multiple times. He said, I thought they and some players in particular played rough sometimes, but I'm not complaining. Pelé was used to this by now. Claudio, the Santos goalkeeper, talking about the Chiefs, said they're a very good team, but they are not, in good physical condition. They started the game moving very fast, but as time passed, they began to slow down. Remember, they were in a very crowded part of their schedule, and they were trying to win their division to get to the playoffs. Claudio went on to say it was a very good match, very fast. Both teams ran a lot, ball moved around a lot. I enjoyed the match. We played very well tonight, probably as good as we have in a long time. Santos took this game very seriously. When Manchester City came to Atlanta, they took part in the luncheons and all the pomp and circumstance around the game. Santos, they were all business. They landed. They went to watch a little bit of the Braves batting practice. They stayed at their motel and rested before the game. They were there to show out and show well, and they did. Some final notes on the game. The attendance ended up at 26,713. Chiefs officials and Woosnam had been quoted. They were hoping for a bigger crowd. That's still a huge, huge crowd. That was the biggest crowd for a soccer match involving an Atlanta team until Atlanta United debuted in 2017. That was the largest one. There had been bigger crowds for games, for friendlies, not involving an Atlanta team. But involving a team from Atlanta, Atlanta Chiefs versus Santos, was the record holder from 1968 to 2017. Dick Cecil said, I thought it was a very good crowd. Actually, I'm glad we were able to get that many people out to see Pelé and Santos. I just hope they enjoyed the match as much as we enjoyed having them. At the time, it was the largest crowd ever to see a North American Soccer League team play. The Napoli-Santos game drew 43,000 at Yankee Stadium in the summer, but the Santos-New York Generals game a few weeks later only drew about 15,000. The crowd went absolutely nuts, and they were dialed in when Freddie Mueller scored early. Tom Dial said that throughout the game, there were oohs and ahs brought on by the stunning footwork of Edu and Pelé and the tremendously accurate passes of all the Brazilians. 26,000 plus for Pelé's visit to Atlanta in 1968. If the North American Soccer League had been able to keep it together at the end of the 1968 season, if the Chiefs had been in a stronger competition, I'm sure they would have had Pelé and Santos back for more visits. They did play a number of international games over the years. This is the pinnacle of it. A lot of people talk about the Manchester City games because the Chiefs won and it was a huge upset. Maybe there's a little bit of a bias towards the English teams. I get it. But this was the game that really shocked a lot of people in terms of what Atlanta could do as a draw and what it could be. And it also was something that stuck with, I think, the Atlanta sports media for a number of years, in that you weren't drawing these kinds of crowds for Atlanta versus St. Louis or Atlanta versus Kansas City in North American Soccer League play. There was an understanding of there is another level here that the North American Soccer League is not at. Now, there was also a lot of belief in what Phil Woosnam was doing and a lot of belief in how good the Chiefs were because of those wins over Manchester City, which can't be discounted. But there was an understanding, even from the Atlanta sports media that knew nothing about soccer except for what they had seen over about a year and a half's time, that the North American Soccer League was not anywhere close to this level. And there was kind of the understanding that the Atlanta sports fans understood that too, and that they were going to come out for these games, but maybe not come out for the league games as much the Chiefs did have some good attendances for North American Soccer League games. Not to this level in their first run, not to this level in their second run either. In the kind of the later days of the North American Soccer League after Pelé had come and gone. But this game in 1968, it's a really important one, and it was a really important moment that maybe gets lost in Atlanta sports history because of what the Falcons turned into and what the Braves have turned into and everything that's happened over the years in terms of Atlanta soccer. But Pelé's one and only visit as a player to Atlanta was a very momentous occasion at Atlanta Stadium on August 28th, 1968. Hope you enjoyed all the background to that game here on Soccer Files. More Soccer Files episodes to come in 2023. Hopefully more recorded content to come from me as I'm still kind of bouncing back from long COVID, still dealing with effects of it, still get wiped out really easily, still dealing with a lot of things, but hopefully a lot of cool, maybe different content coming as I'm trying to reorganize and reprioritize things in 2023. And look, we're only a few days away from Atlanta United getting on the field for preseason training. Can't wait to see all of what 2023 brings, and thanks for being part of it here at SDH. We'll talk soon. Mucha plata, y'all.